Yeah, we're live. I'm even done before or starting before 7. It's 6:56, so I'm early today. That's okay. We were a couple of days late yesterday. It's all working out good. I see John is in the house. Let's see what John's question is before we start getting to our intercooler discussion. You are the man, Richard. I have an L3 stock bottom end. Those work very well, as I showed in the video that I just posted. Bottom end with a single eBay 80mm turbo. Ever since it's been installed, I've been getting E85 in my catch can. Not my usual VR1 oil. Should I be concerned? How could you be getting E85 in your catch can coming from your PCV system? I don't understand how that's possible. There's no way for E85 to get down into your motor unless it's going by the rings, and I don't know how that would be possible unless something was broken. So if you are getting actual E85 and you're not getting oil vapor in there, then I would be concerned, especially if it's not making the power. Maybe a compression test is probably a good way to take a look at that. Yes, everyone's in the house. But back to our discussion. So the discussion tonight is all about intercoolers, and you can see from the thumbnail that I posted up, this was actually the brick style air-to-water intercooler used on an 0304 Cobra motor. So here's my question, and this is what brought all this up. I get obviously comments and stuff all the time from people asking questions about intercoolers. And the thing that I find interesting is this sort of brick style intercooler underneath the blower is very common for OEM applications. I mean, it's obviously, in one way, we salute them because you have a supercharger on a factory OEM application. So right away, we know, like in the 03 Cobra and on all of the LT4 stuff or LT5 GM stuff, and on the GT500 stuff, all of the factory stuff and Hellcat stuff, I love the fact that they run factory force induction motors, because the OEM level of engineering that goes into that is awesome. So we know that there's lots of potential in there. And I like the fact that when they put blowers on them, they usually have, they can have forged internals, and so we know that the way that they tune them and the way that they run them isn't anywhere near what they're capable of. So they can run lots more power on these OEM applications. And I also salute the fact that when they do these things, they run these air-to-water intercoolers on them. But here is my question, and here is really my concern, and this is what started this thing off down the path here, is that like everything else with these setups designed by the OEMs, as I said, they put a great deal of effort and time and research and development to make these things do what they're supposed to do. And it's almost never maximum power. A lot of guys think, oh, why can't the OEMs make power? Oh, believe me, if that was their design goal, they would have no problem doing it. There's really sharp guys there, and they have their level of R&D and measurement and calibration and all that stuff is beyond what most people even realize. So they have the capability of doing that very easy. They just don't, because that's not one of their design criteria. So when they size everything, when they size the blower in the case of the 0304 Cobra and the intercooler, the air-to-water intercooler, they size that stuff so that it will work under what they would call the most extreme conditions. So when they do testing with these OEM motors, they run them in very cold temperatures and very hot temperatures, and they run them, unfortunately, the way that people out there that probably shouldn't be driving would run them. They lug them in top gear and make them go up a hill at 1,000 RPM, and they just do dumb stuff. And so when the OEMs tune these things, they have to make sure that they'll do this, like a guy that might take it out to the Silver State and run it flat out for 40 minutes. And so they have to make sure that these things would be able to withstand that. And so when they, for instance, on the intercooler, when they size the intercooler, it's sized not just enough to be able to make it. It's oversized for its application. But here's the thing. It's not infinitely oversized. So if you look at the brick style intercooler on that 0304 Cobra or any of these other ones that I mentioned on the Chevy and the Dodge side and others on the Ford side, they're sized for a particular application. And when I say application, I mean they're sized for a particular combination of flow rate, so how much airflow that they'll support, and heat rejection, because that's what intercoolers are all about. They're a combination of how much flow can I get through there? And these two things, unfortunately, with intercoolers are often at odds. So if you look at an air-to-air or an air-to-water intercooler, what you're trying to do is maximize the flow rate. Okay, we want the least amount of restriction to maximize the flow rate, obviously, right? But the problem with that is we want restriction in the intercooler because we want the way that an intercooler works is it has lots of surface area. So you want that hot air to come in contact with as much surface area as it can. That way it can transfer the hot part of the charge air into the colder part of the intercooler, and it can draw that heat out. And then when it exits out, and unfortunately, the best way to do that is to slow that airflow down and restrict it somewhat. So as I said, those two things are kind of at odds. And then when you look at the size of these air-to-water intercoolers, like I said, they make them for, in the case of the Cobra, I think that they rated it, I don't know, 390 horsepower, something like that. We know that it made more than that. They underrated them from the factory because we've run lots of them, and they make very good power. But the thing is, we can't turn them up indefinitely. And one of the things on these applications that kind of limits power production is the way that they designed everything is there's not a lot of excess room to make a much bigger intercooler. So there just isn't real estate for that. So if you look down in the valley of a modular Ford, or in this case, inside the lower intake manifold, and lots of these blower applications are like that. They basically have a lower manifold that the blower and the intercooler slide onto, and then the intercooler goes down in the recess of this thing. Sometimes they're up above, and they're doing it to try to fit packaging because they want to make the cars as aerodynamic as possible. So you don't want a big hood bulge. You don't want a pro stock hood scoop, which would make life a lot easier because then you could fit any kind of intercooler on there that you wanted. So they have a lot of constraints that are going to dictate what the size of these things are. But the problem is, if they size this intercooler core, like on the 03 Cobra motor, they size that for 390 horsepower. These motors have made 500, 600, 700 with other bigger blowers and stuff on them. But the thing is, at some point, the intercooler itself becomes two things. One, it becomes a flow restriction because it wasn't designed, one thing, to flow the amount of airflow. Like, it wasn't designed to flow 1,000 horsepower worth of air. I'm not saying that you can't put a giant blower on there and try to force it through there. It's just that you're going to have a big pressure differential on one side and the other side of the core. So you could try to force that through there, and you can kind of make it work. But the problem is, in addition to being a flow restriction, it's also not going to work very well as heat rejection because it just can't do that. It's not sized for that. It doesn't have the water flow rate. It doesn't have the surface area. It doesn't have the other things it needs to be efficient at the higher power flow and boost and temperature levels, because it wasn't designed to do that. So my question is, when you look at, and this got me thinking of, these people use these brick cores underneath these blowers a lot, but if you take that out, people think that they work magic and they don't think about them a lot. But if you take that out and then compare that core size to other things that we run, now we know that an air-to-water intercooler can be smaller than an air-to-air intercooler. You need more surface area. The transfer medium is not as good. The air is not nearly as dense as water. The water is much more efficient. So the core itself can be smaller. We realize that. But even on an air-to-water core, the ones that we use for 600, 700, 1,000, whatever horsepower are much, much bigger than the typical cores that you see in these factory OEM blower applications. But yet guys will still try to, they'll still try to turn them up thinking that their flow rate is infinite. And I've seen them really spin the blowers up a lot. And they try to, the people try to do what they can. They augment these cores with, you can increase the flow rate through the core, and that helps. You can have a bigger reservoir, so as you pass the water through there, that it doesn't get heat soaked and that. But ultimately, there's a core problem that's going to limit what you can do with these things and how efficient you can become with an intercooler. The other as a side benefit or something that helps you with the situation is, usually these runs under boost are fairly short. So even if we see a temperature rise, you might not get all of that temperature rise because you don't see it happen as fast. If you were to run a blower sustained for a minute, let's say, or 2 minutes, the charge temperature coming out of the blower would be much hotter than if you were just to run that thing as a quick burst for 10 or 15 seconds. And so not a lot of guys do that. Most of them, if you have a 600 or 700 horsepower blower motor and you're racing against somebody else or you're doing something out on the street, we can't run wide open throttle for that long. If you're out on a road course, you can obviously do that. If you're out at the Silver State, you can do that. But in most cases, certainly not on public roads, you can't really do that. And even in drag racing, if you have a fairly high horsepower combination, it's going to be an 11-second, 10-second, 9-second, 8-second, whatever car. So even that application doesn't have a lot of time at temperature. So that helps a little bit. But, these OEM applications, like I said, I salute them and I think that they're awesome. But in the same way, they're also kind of limiting. And one way that guys get around that, and one of the things that we did with my buddy Jimmy and Nathan, the guys back in HP Performance, is to run turbos. A lot of guys will take because the basic motor in the case of the 03 Cobra or the Shelby or the Hellcat or the LT4 motors, because they're designed for forced induction, they don't really care that you take the blower off and just run a conventional manifold and then run a bigger intercooler and then run a turbo or two turbos and then blow through the motor, as long as obviously you have enough fuel and you have the ability to control the timing and you use good gas and all the normal things that we do. But that's one way to get around these limited core sizes of some of the factory stuff. So if you guys have had any experience with any of these cores, what I'm interested in is some of these OEM applications like the Hellcat stuff, the Shelby stuff, I don't think maybe some of the Cobra stuff might be interesting too. I just don't know at what point. What I need is guys who have data logged a lot of this stuff. Like at what point do we start worrying about the core size on some of these factory OEM applications? When do we get to this? We know guys crank the boost up a lot and put E85, and all that helps and it makes more power. But there's got to be a point where you have to start thinking, okay, either I need a different intercooler, I need a different blower or an assembly on the top, and then I just need to put a bigger intercooler up front and a bigger blower or turbos or whatever we're going to do. So that's my discussion on intercoolers tonight. Let's see what you guys got going on. I'm Robert. I'm a boomer, and I've never cared for roots blowers. Turbos are the way to go. Roots blowers, the guy that chooses a roots blower over a turbo is not doing it for efficiency. He's doing it for presence. He's doing it because it looks the way that it looks. Nobody, there are guys that I've talked to that are roots blower guys, and they want to argue with me about how good they really are, and oh, you need a high helix one, and you need all these things. A roots blower is the least efficient of all of the blowers. So if you are forced to run a roots blower versus turbos, you're not going to do very well. I know that there are applications where they work, and I love them. It doesn't stop me from not liking them. Their efficiency level doesn't stop me from liking them. They're just a different thing. They do something different than turbos do, and that's why I like the fact that there's more than one kind. I like blowers. I like turbos. I like centrifugals and twin screws and roots blowers and all the weird ones too, like the Comprex blower that I was reading about and the Latham axial flow and all these weird things. And I like the fact that there's more than one to choose from, because let's face it, that's why I like the fact that there are more than one kind of car or more than one kind of motor for all of us to choose from, so that we can be individuals and we can like what we like and do what we do. I don't anymore. I don't care about being just like everybody else. Let's see. What would a good junkyard turbo be to look out for? First of all, you're going to need to find some. Sometimes they're hard to find in the wrecking yards. Take a look over at if you have trucks in your area, look at some of the turbo diesel trucks. They've got some that are big enough. Do a dodge it for the demon. Use R34. Again, you can change the charge temperature. You can make the thing more efficient, but still, the size of the core itself, even if it were, well below ambient or even below zero, that brick is only going to flow so much, and it's going to become restrictive. And also, like I said, the flow rate through the core of the transfer medium is another thing. It was designed to flow at a certain level, and you can increase the pump speed and all that, but it's still going to be limiting. And that goes along with the other small things I was talking about, making it a little bit more efficient, but baby steps comparatively necessary. Let's see, Julia, see if you can find information on Miami V8 factory unintercooled. Then with the brick in place, you should give you some data. Miami is the Aussie-made supercharger Coyote used in the last Falcons. Okay. 871, yeah, I like those, and 1071s and 1471s all the way up. Is running a turbo, and this is Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, and is running a turbo in its efficiency range just as important as intercooler sizing. I went from a cast 7875 T4 to a billet 80, and intercooler temps went down. If you're talking about running it in its efficiency range, that would be the optimum one would be at the highest efficiency range of the island of the compressor map. And we'll talk about why almost nobody does that when I do another video on compressor maps. Have you tested an interchiller? I have not yet. Dr. Differential, intercooler sizing. I know this too well. I did a cheap intercooler, was having issues with inlet air temperatures going sky high during a run, went to 1,000 horsepower treadstone, and my problems went away. It is important to have the right core, have the right size, the right flow rate. All that stuff has to be fairly well scienced out. The other thing I see a lot of that I find is interesting, and I saw a lot of this because I don't go out the drag strip that much, but I remember seeing it a lot at Bonneville, and that's people using their ice water tank. They were making it out of aluminum, which I know why they do that. It looks cool. They can polish it. It's easy to fabricate and all that stuff. Except that what that does is when you put ice water in that, the aluminum wants to equalize the temperature of whatever's outside versus whatever's inside. It acts as a very good conductor. Aluminum is very good like that. If you have a plastic one like we did, and not because I did this out of design, because I think I'm smart, because I'm not, but we had a plastic fuel cell that we used that happened to bolt right in where we needed it. And we used that as our intercooler tank. And plastic is a very good insulator. And so when we put our ice water in there, there would still be ice and stuff at the end of our run at Bonneville. We could put drinks in there and stuff and to celebrate at the end of our run, hopefully, that we went really, really fast. But with an aluminum one, the ice tends to melt faster. VMP supposedly has an answer for the O3 Cobra with their version of the Cobra intercooler. It's supposedly 5 to 7% larger and flows 20% better. It's billet and looks very nice, but no one has tested it yet. And see, again, if it's 5 to 7% larger, that's not very much more. I mean, I'm talking about these cores need to be twice as big as they are. And there's, again, there is just no room for that sort of thing in packaging. So Tim's recommending that you get to go highway tractors. Volvo and Detroit use true Garrett turbos. So those are pricey items. The GT 4594, that's a big turbo. 70 millimeter inducer, good to 700 or 900 horsepower. Diesels are usually picked clean before they hit the yard. Yeah, we get that with a lot of stuff. Tom's in the house. Plus, it's almost $2,000 for the supposed game. And that's the thing that we saw. We did an intercooler way back for the 3800 Series 2. And again, just because of packaging, it limits the core size that you can use. And so you can't get a whole bunch of cooling, the combination of a whole bunch of cooling and a lot of flow rate. If you have unlimited hood size or hood space, then you could obviously do a lot better. And the problem is with roots blowers, if you really start turning them up high, some of these ones that if you're trying to run 15 or 20 pounds, there's a lot of charge temperature coming out of that blower. Can you test a loud Vortex supercharger against a tiny Rotrex supercharger? What is a loud Vortex supercharger? A 4.3 should be a good test engine. Same boosting conditions. Just want to see parasitic drag between them. You're not going to see parasitic drag by that comparison. You need to run them on a blower dyno would be ideal. And the Rotrex superchargers are fairly small. They don't support a lot of power. So maybe a 4.3 V6 would be good because it's only making 200 horsepower. So it might be a good application for a low boost kind of thing. John Mahovitz put a Lightning intercooler in his Terminator motor and made 990 horsepower. Is the Lightning intercooler is different? I would think that the Lightning intercooler would be smaller than the 03 Cobra, but I have never looked at them back to back. Adam wants to know, what would you recommend to cool an 0304 Cobra supercharger on a 94 to 04 V6 3.8 liter Ford? I have the adapter plate for it and to mount to the engine. If you are using that 03 Cobra motor, you should use, or the 03 Cobra supercharger, you should use the intercooler assembly too. And your adapter plate should include a provision to allow that core to sit down in the valley. Because for that application, you're not going to be making a ton of power, and you're going to be making 03 Cobra kind of power in that, I would imagine, anyway. And so it should work fairly well. Small block Chevy 350 8500 cast heads solid lifter build. Are you asking me if I want to do that? Because the answer is absolutely not. I've got a 76 R code Oldsmobile 350. I've been thinking about putting some boost in it. That's good. They all need boost. Even like I said, we always talk about going crazy on boost levels and stuff, but even like 7 pounds on one of these older motors, a small block Chevy or Pontiac or Buick or Oldsmobile, all of those, it's amazing what it does when you add boost to that. It makes it a lot more fun. My treadstone will only go up about 10 degrees during a quarter mile pass in 90-degree weather. It's 5-inch core, but it's big because I'm on a Ram, although coolant temps went down due to less flow. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the other thing on air-to-air intercoolers. You have to worry about the engine cooling because you've taken up, obviously, a lot of the airflow if you put that in front of the radiator. So that's another consideration on intercooler stuff. I'm surprised that you only have that much change in temperature, and I'm surprised that an air-to-air intercooler is that close. If you're talking about 10 degrees, I don't know if you're talking about 10 degrees over ambient. That would be unusual for an air-to-air. Have you ever seen anybody put rock salt in their cool cans? Yeah, they're just trying to change the freezing point of the water. What if I ran my fuel through a transmission cooler in my ice water? What would the effects be? That's what we talked about that in one of the other live feeds, Tom. That's what I want to do. We're going to cool the water, and we're going to run it through an oil cooler and put it in an ice water bath. The cooling the fuel should help quite a bit. I have a giant supersized air-to-air spherical. Am I reliant? No issues cooling charge. Nice. Yeah, and I'm actually surprised about how well these coolers work. Even though I know way back in the day, I went through this with the guys from ProCharger, and they were talking about, oh, you don't know how to test, and you run these air-to-air intercoolers, you run them on the dyno, but they don't have 150 mile an hour worth of airflow going through them when you're running on the dyno, so they don't do what they do out on the street. I'm like, well, if you're at a drag strip, the only time you're going 150 is at the very end. Most of that is not that. But what surprises me is even when we don't have 10,000 CFM worth of airflow going 150 miles an hour going through the intercooler core, how well they work. And it's, like I said, it's just for a short blast. Even though a typical dyno pull lasts longer than a quarter mile run does, it's still impressive on how well they cool. Just getting the hot air to go through this, cold heat exchanger works pretty well. ProCharge Mopar. Oh, so you watched the 440 versus the Hemi. That's a cool deal. I saw that happen back when they did the testing, and it's fairly interesting. The Hemi, they have a reputation of being hard to tune and all that way back in the day. But the thing that a Hemi has going for it is it has a lot better cylinder heads than a 440 does. A 440 basically has small block Chevy sized cylinder heads for it, unfortunately, because I think that those things would make a lot more power if they had better cylinder heads. That's one of the reasons that a big block Chevy makes pretty good power. Is a rec port head, although not ideal, is a lot more flow than any of the 440 heads. So that's kind of limiting on the 440. But I do love the fact that they ran dual quads and a tri-power setup, which, multiple carburetors is always awesome. How long are we with the 4200 Atlas? I'm not really understanding what you're asking there. Off subject, but what do you usually pay for a 4.8 or 5.3 out of the salvage yard? I wonder if it's worth having one shipped to me from a different state. $1,200 is a lot. I mean, the wrecking yards here are going to be more like $400 or $500. Julie, so you put the idea of the compound barrel in my head. Yes, I shouldn't have mentioned that, huh? And now I have to do it. Do you think we'll need an intercooler under the blower? I would. That's how we ran the 03 Cobra motor when we did it with the guys from HP Performance. The blower has its own air-to-water intercooler, and then we had two turbos blowing into the blower, but we also had an intercooler between the turbos and the blower. So it was twinner-cooled. Twinner-cooled. Looking for a turbo for my 6-liter build. Are you better off buying one that's too big so I can slowly build another bottom end after it's on the truck? Any issues other than slow to spool up? You don't want it to be too big that you get near the surge line if you're running low boost. That's a consideration. You can take a look at that on the map and figure that out fairly fast if the turbo that you're looking at has a compressor map, which lots of the offshore ones do not. But on a 6-liter build, if you're looking, I don't know how much power you ultimately want to make, but if you're looking at the S475 or S480 kind of or S485 kind of range where you can make 12 or 1300 horsepower, that should work out well. If an engine with a peaky horsepower, say a NASCAR Cup engine, was fitted with a turbo setup, could it be possible to flatten the torque curve like a Bentley GT3? I don't know what a Bentley GT3 looks like, and I don't know what the power curve looks like, or is it all in the valve train? A Cup engine would not be something that I would put boost on unless you changed it. Those motors are real specific to what they're doing. They have tiny little ring packs on them and stuff, and so it would not be, I don't think. And ours, the Westex motors have you have to heat them up before you start them and do all kinds of stuff. So that's not really a good application for a turbo, I don't think. Richard, for circuit racing, if you're talking about road racing, I would use an air-to-air. It's much better because you have an endless supply of air flow through it, and it should stay. The charge temperature should stay fairly constant. Okay, so 10 degrees over your starting air temperature. That makes sense. That's good. If it doesn't rise, that's perfect. Yeah, it's hard to beat that GT45 turbo for price and stuff. And even if it breaks, you're not out hardly anything. You get the charge temperature down to negative 100. That would be really, really cold. Turbo 32 coupe. My twin turbo Ford 4.6 Cobra has twin Garrett GT 28 76s. Those are pretty small. It makes 550 horsepower at 7 pounds. Is your Cobra motor modified then? Boost comes on at 1800 RPM with a GT28, so they might do that. eBay air-to-air cooler keeps temp at 7 degrees over ambient. That seems a little cold to me. Just the thermal mass of the intercooler is enough to cool a charge for a few seconds so the car picks up speed. Yeah, that's what's happening. With my 76 olds, I have two choices: a nice set of heads or turbo. The turbo is going to make a lot more power than cylinder head upgrade will. The guys at Westech have run their fuel through coolers. They did that testing before, and I want to do it with fuel injection. Got a Volvo Penta intake for my Gen 6 7.4. I don't know that I've seen one of those or that I remember what they look like. You don't need to really worry. The question is in terms of intercooler, where's the threshold when it comes to going larger on intercooler and gaining cooling efficiency versus boost pressure loss? You don't really have to worry about that. It would be really hard to put enough intercooler volume to where you would lose boost pressure. You might see that more on a centrifugal blower. You're not going to see that on a probably on a roots blower, and you're probably not going to see that on a turbo too, because this turbo is going to kind of be self-compensating. So I would try to get cooling as much as you can. Usually the size of the intercooler is mainly a function of fitment, because you can't fill up the whole area on an air-to-air in front of the radiator. You have to have some flow through the radiator. And on an air-to-water, again, it's just fitment, packaging under the hood. Where are you going to place the air-to-water? How can you package all the stuff that you need to package in the limited space? Because let's face it, we all don't have unlimited space. The nice thing on remote turbos is you can do a lot of that stuff in the bed of the truck or in the back of the car or whatever, and that gives you more room. So then you can size things properly. In my opinion, I don't think you can make the intercooler too big. Does the turbo itself affect back pressure? Yes, actually almost more than anything else. You can size the turbo, especially the hot side, to change back pressure a lot. We did air-to-water intercoolers with alcohol and dry ice. Intake temps were below freezing after the intercooler. That doesn't seem right. Dry ice actually doesn't work very well because it outgasses really fast. And I don't know about the, is that a volatile mixture when you have those two together? Let's see. Can you build my 1990 454 Super Sport motor for me? I got closed chamber heads and an intake so far, and I don't do that. Aaron, I built a 306 small block Ford and have a Vortec S trim, and I bought a used and supposedly a 10-pound pulley and a 5-inch AFM P pipe and sawing method injection. What horsepower should I expect? I don't know what heads you have. I don't know what cam you have. I don't know what the naturally aspirated started out as. So a Vortec S trim will support a lot of power. I think we've made over 750 with them. So you could do that, I guess, if you wanted to. Are D3s the best possible head for the small block, or should I go Edelbrock Pro Port Rods? That's beyond my testing. I haven't ever tested either one of those heads. Julius, I think I'm going to lose heaps of low-speed power and torque with the runners and the manifold. Yeah, if they're short. So GT45 into an air-to-air intercooler, into the throttle body, and into the M112 water-to-air intercooler. But that's a lot going on. But yeah, it'll just be cool if nothing else. Admiral, you can try 3 intercoolers. I want to run 2 of them on the engine dyno. We want to run, because the primary intercooler, or the first one, will get the majority of the charge air out. It could change it, like in a typical intercooler scenario. You can change it from 300 down to 105 or 110 or 100 teens, and then hopefully with ice water, and you might be able to, with ice water, if you run ice water through both of them, you might be able to get it even lower, and then you should be able to cool it even further with another pass through a non-restrictive core that's big enough, and get it down even further. And I'd kind of like to see what the difference would be doing the twinner-cooled versus a single one. How would you make a turbo kit hit peak torque at low RPM and hold peak torque through roughly a 5,000 RPM range? Yeah, that's going to be, the OEMs try to do that. They like to have, the way that they do it is with a falling boost curve. So they usually have a turbo that's very small, that's very responsive. Typically, they have long runner intakes, mild cam timing. It's a lot easier with variable cam too if they have that. But they have the turbo come on very fast. And then what they do is have a falling boost curve, and they have a fairly broad torque curve on that if that's what you want. A 5,000 RPM range that has the same torque is hard to do and would take some design, but you can have a fairly broad one though. If you have electronic control over the wastegate and you have it signaled versus RPM, that's possible. Richard, with the same cam and a 454 and 496 red line at the same RPM, no. The red line, if you're using that term the way that I think you are, is going to be where you don't want to run the motor any higher. So the absolute RPM limit of the motor is not going to be a function of that camshaft other than how stable it is and how stable your valve train is. They're going to make power at different RPM ranges. The 496 is going to make peak power earlier than the 454, and you might run them both at the same RPM, assuming the rest of your valve train can do that. But probably the 496 is going to peak earlier. How cold are you trying to get the fuel? I'm not trying to get it like ice cold. I'm not trying to use liquid nitrogen or anything like that. But I would like to see what it is when we're running it at 58 PSI or so. I want to see what the temperature is and how hot it gets, because I suspect that the temperature circulating on a return and a non-return, because it's bypassing on a non-return system, I'd like to see how hot the fuel gets in the tank. I would kind of like to put a sender in there and find out what it is when you're driving around, say on a summer day. How hot does that actually get? And is there a difference between those two fuel systems that ultimately, when you're driving around, that affect the fuel temperature in the tank? And then I want to see what the fuel temperature is when you're running it. And then I'd like to see how low we could get it. So I'd like a few different data points there, because a lot of times the engine dyno doesn't simulate what's happening out on the road. And I don't know that it would for fuel temperature, but we'll be able to measure the fuel temperature in these systems on the engine dyno. Did you see the guys on Drag Week with fuel temperature problems? No. Were they having vapor lock problems or something? UPS mech, I've got a compound 12 valve with interstage cooling. That's cool. Air to air on the atmosphere and air to water on the manifold. The more cooling, the better, man. Is it the cold, hot, cold cycles that break nitrous engines? It's usually detonation. It's usually a temporary lean condition. Mike doesn't want to use an intercooler. As an aside, your talkback show seems to have spawned a copycat. David, I like David, and I hope that he does well. And if you look back at when we've been doing these live feeds, and you look at what Uncle Tony started after that, he kind of did the same thing. I think he might have been doing it one day a week, and then all of a sudden he realized, hey, why is that Richard guy doing it so often? And he realized that that's probably a pretty good idea. E85 blew through carb. What is considered the high side for safe? I don't know. I don't equate a temperature number to whether it's safe or not, because a lot of guys can get away with more things if you have depending on your combination, what the static compression ratio is, what the cam timing is, whether you have an aluminum or an iron head, what the chamber shape, all of those things, what the load is, what the boost is, all of those things. There are lots of guys out there doing things with E85 on blow-through applications, and even regular gas on blow-through applications with no intercoolers that I wouldn't do, but they're doing it successfully. So it obviously can be done. My safety threshold is way below theirs. Is a turbo blanket safe to use on a daily car? Yes, we like them, especially they keep heat away from other stuff. But I've never seen any actual data on whether or not it affects the longevity or life of the turbo. I agree, Tim, that the GT2876 is an oddly lopsided turbo. It seems like a lot of hot side. Blow through carb guys are running 8s with a small block Ford. So Dodgy said he watched most of David's live stream. Was it good? He's a very knowledgeable guy. How's the Holly Sniper intake on a 6.4 Hemi nitrous versus NA versus boost? Forget about the nitrous and the boost. Whatever that manifold does NA, and if it's a sniper and it's a short runner sniper compared to the factory intakes, it's going to lose power down low and might gain power up top. I've never tested the Hemi version, but we've tested all the other versions, and they kind of do that. They're making the manifold because it's easy to make. The design is easy to make like that. Not I think because it's optimum, but before I test it, I'm not going to say for sure. But like with the LS and the small block Chevys and the other things that they've done, that's fairly typical. And not just of snipers, it's typical of every manifold. If you shorten the runner length, you're going to lose low speed and mid-range power up to whatever point is that you've shortened the manifold. Should I do a cam upgrade on an 07 Dodge Hemi and a Charger or a turbo? The turbo will make a lot more power than a cam, but typically what guys do on LS stuff, and I recommend the same thing on that year Hemi, is do a cam, springs, and boost. Yeah, that's T is saying do both, yeah. Let's see. So Turbo Coupe is saying that the GT2876 is full enough air for 450 horsepower each. That's quite a bit. I'm right in the high efficiency island on the map. Proper sizing, the turbo keeps charge temperatures down. If you're keeping it at the right spot on the compressor map, if you're in an island of efficiency, that's going to be the lowest possible charge temperature for that compressor because it's most efficient right there if you can run it there. Again, it's assuming that you don't have lots of back pressure from the other side of the turbo from that sizing, and that hopefully you're getting good air to the turbos, which is very, very important, and that your intercooler is obviously working. Would the fuel flowing into a water-to-air cooler under the blower have an issue with backfire? So it turned into a grenade. I have the factory LPG mixture I could use instead of E10. I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to have to see a drawing of what you're talking about. I don't know how you're getting fuel into a water-to-air cooler. Are you trying to cool the fuel while you're running this thing on the street? Almost everyone that runs a mechanical pump during drag week have vapor lock problems. Wow. Fred said, on gas mileage builds, I've read gasoline vapor had very high gains in mile per gallon, the exact opposite of chilling the fuel charge. That's true. And we see that with the charge air as well. Typically on a performance application, you want to make more power, you have cold air coming to the turbos, to the motor, however you do it. But if you're trying to get good fuel mileage, you actually want hot air, so that would work the same. Pedro, if you're adding a fuel cooler for daily use, would you add it on the return side? You could. I would like to have it on the feed side so that you have the cold fuel going into the motor and not just cooling the fuel going to the tank. It'd be interesting to see if that eventually all just worked out. But I'd rather have the fuel that's actually going into the motor if you could do that. And we did that on our we had a 77 Chevy dually truck with a 454 carbureted one, and we had issues with vapor lock. So what we did was we ran the fuel from the pump up to a heat exchanger, a little cooler, like a little oil cooler, and put it in front of the radiator, and then ran that line back over to the carburetor, and that seemed to cure the problem. We also insulated the fuel lines so that because it gets really hot. I mean, if you're loading, you have a trailer and you're lugging it up a hill, all those exhaust manifolds get glowing red hot. So we insulated all of the fuel lines too with the just like tubing. Richard, when are you putting a straight 6 in a Mazda Miata? That's probably not me. I'd rather put a K series in a Mazda Miata. Let's see, I'll take some pictures of the cars in the manifold. The manifold gets here. I can run injectors in the manifolds. Have to run fuel into the top of the blower. That makes sense. I was back behind when all of the comments. Yeah, an 8.1 is obviously going to be more expensive than just building a conventional small block. Yeah, I'll have to send David a message and find out what's going on with him. A Yamaha R1, that'd be nice. Plastic carb spacers help with vapor lock too. Yep. And ours already had the insulator between the carburetor and the intake manifold. Port meth injection, that would be good. That's what we wanted to do, and we never did it when I did the water meth test with Freiberger, where we changed the position of the water meth injection to measure the temperature change in each of the ports. I told David that I wanted to run individual port injection to see what was happening with that. I just never did it. Almost done with the hot side of my Turbo 4300. Those are cool. Karen says, I'd like to see a separate fuel system using an NOS fogger fuel only and a Hobb switch that turns it on under boost with E85. Jewish. It's way cheaper to just run a GT45 on its own, but I had to have that manifold. I can see why you want the manifold. You're going to be the only one on the block that has that. What's a good cheap TBI to set up? I don't know that I would put one on there unless you're using are you talking about like a 4-hole throttle body like the Holley probably calls them snipers, I would imagine. Everybody was making them for a while. MSD had some, Fast had some. I think the guys at Tech have them. I've run the Fast version, the Easy EFI, and I've also run the Holley versions, I think, too. Curtis says, hey, Richard, if you want to run a centrifugal blower on the Barra, I have a 10-rib pulley for the balancer. Thank you. XE26814, will that cam work with a PI swap on a 97 block clearance-wise? I don't know. You have to measure it. Have you ever done a carb draw-through turbo like the Pontiac turbos or the Martin turbos or any of those? I haven't. And the Volkswagen guys used to do that a lot for the sandrail stuff, but I haven't run one. I looked into doing one, but kind of gave up on it. Richard, have you ever tried the eBay generic 4-barrel throttle bodies? No, I haven't. The problem I have with throttle bodies in particular, and even single blade throttle bodies like a 92 or 102 millimeter throttle body, or the 4-hole throttle bodies as well, from people that might not be qualified to do them, there's a lot of work that actually goes into making a throttle body work. You can make the throttle blades and the shafts and all that stuff, excuse me, but actually getting them to seal and work and not stick and do all that takes a bit of work. That's why I really like the stuff that Mahovas does, and I know that it's expensive, but we know that it's right every time we run it. So they do good stuff. Motorcycle engines in cars are a good idea until you try it. They make negative amounts of torque. Turbo K series just make hundreds of more horses. The reason I like the bike engines in cars, or when I like them, is at Bonneville, because you can run cars in classes with smaller bike engines that are beneficial for setting records in very small displacement classes. I used eBay ITBs on my 427 Ford. Good. That's good. I'm not saying that people have problems with all of them. I'm just saying that that's something that I look for when guys are trying to get these things to work. I've had lots of throttle bodies, like I said, even just single blade ones, where you can hold the throttle body up to light and you can see daylight through both sides, and not an even amount of daylight on both sides. So it's not great. The brand of throttle bodies that I like are the guys from AccuFab do, but they don't do a lot of LS stuff. So Holley has those as well. I don't think you need a special turbo just to do a few dyno pulls with the setup. Probably not. And we could even take one of the GT45s and take it apart and put a carbon seal in it if we thought it was going to be a problem. The justification for air to water intercoolers, they work very well. I had an air to water intercooler on my Sprint that I drove daily, and it worked fantastic. They also are great out at Bonneville, and obviously for drag racing, they work well too. A lot of guys will say that, oh, you can't run those. A secondary heat exchanger, that's not efficient. It doesn't work. I can tell you, I monitored all the temperatures when I was driving my Sprint around. And when you're driving around and you're not in boost for most of the time, because that's how most of us drive, when you're driving around, the temperature, the water temperature stays near ambient because it's circulating through a secondary heat exchanger that's up in front of the radiator. And I never had a problem. And we're talking about driving from Vegas to West Tech, which is in Miraloma. And if you don't know that area, it's all hot. I mean, we're talking 115 or 120 degrees with no AC. So it works fairly well as long as everything's sized properly. Bigger, better intercoolers, lower boost. You will get lower boost from an intercooler, not because it's a restriction, but because you've changed the temperature. If you change the temperature from 300 degrees to 100 degrees, you're going to get a drop. You have to. You can't not. So that's actually beneficial. A lot of people attribute the drop in like a pressure drop as a negative thing. And if you had 2 or 3 pounds of pressure drop, I would say the intercooler is too small, or you have too many bends, or the lengths, or the tightness of the bends. Those things can be problems, but you will always get a drop in pressure across an intercooler core. Any chance of running a blow-through carb versus a Holley Sniper? The Holley Sniper 4-hole throttle body thing? The Cadillac blower on the 6-liter was probably belt slippage. What size turbos would you recommend for remote mount twin turbos on a 4.6 modular, looking at 700 to 800 horsepower? Probably GT30 76s, I'm thinking. A K car with a 2.2 turbo, I do like those. Oh, here we go. Intercoolers don't make power, they prevent detonation. I'm wanting to run twin turbos on my 2002 6-liter Silverado. Any size suggestion? How much power do you want to make out of your 6-liter? I don't know. A Holley Sniper versus a carburetor, I don't know how you'd see much of a difference between those two. If they're injecting fuel in the same spot and you're blowing through both of them and you are able to tune both of them correctly, I don't know that there would be much of a difference. You need water injection for your face on the drive from Vegas to LA with no AC. Yeah, during the summer, it was really, really hot. Yeah, I would turn the fan on and just blow air, except that it was like sucking out a blow dryer. It was not good. Not good at all. In the Sprint, when I used to drive it, it would get so hot that I would leave I'd be sweating, and I would get the imprint from the pattern from the multicolored seats that are in the Sprint. I would get that pattern on the back of my shirt. Yeah, those were the days. Yeah, it is. It's warm today. It was over 100 here. I know. In thinking back, I should have brought like a mister or something. That would have been very smart of me. I could have even rigged one up that I could have used to spray. It would have been good. Is TBI better than multi-port EFI? For what? We have to get very specific about what you're talking about. Multi-port EFI allows you to adjust individual cylinders. So ultimately, for tuning and making all the cylinders the same, that works better. But if you inject fuel in a typical carbureted intake manifold, you usually pick up power compared to port injection. So if you can tune that, the problem is with throttle body injection or with a carburetor, you cannot do individual cylinder tuning. So you're trading one thing for the other. Vern, still 102 there. Yeah, it's warm. What is your favorite brand of cam as far as else? I don't really have one. There's lots of good stuff out there. Yeah, sweat stains. These leather seats down under don't work. Neither do sheepskin covers, but people still buy them. And yeah, these were cloth seats, so that's what the Sprint had. It was not a leather deal, and I didn't have any seat covers on it. Driving around with no AC builds character. It did. It was no picnic. Water injection to the turbo inlet and methanol injection in the port runner negate the intercooler altogether. I've never seen anything that stops the intercooler from working, from being better. Turbos are insensitive to cam. Is that the same way as saying every cam is a turbo cam? Let's see. For my 2002 6-liter, I'm looking to sustain between 580 and 7. That's an odd combination, but yeah, 2 GT 3076s will do that, or 2 GT 3582s will do that, or a, well, not on a 6-liter. Richard, do you have a hot rod still today? Yes, I have my 5-liter. I'm an original owner of a 5-liter LX Mustang, a 1988, first year of the Mass Air car. Currently 104 in Bakersfield. Yeah, that's warm. It does get hot there. Driven through there many times on my route from Vegas to West Tech and back. Oh, so you have, Matt, you had an OG hot air Grand National. Nice. Front mount intercooler. Nice. Quicker spool, power, vacuum to max power. Yep. But same max boost detonation threshold, 91. The same max, it had the same detonation threshold at the same maximum boost in it? That seems odd. Julius is saying it's cold there, 15 degrees C, which is 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Nice. The difference in power from a stock cam and a hot cam is not worth the money. It can be spent better elsewhere. That's that. Are you talking about doing a cam swap and an LS on a turbo application? You're saying it's not worth it? That's not anywhere near accurate. 159 in Death Valley. Nice. I guess you win. Are you still driving the 5-liter? No, I haven't driven it in years and years and years. It's just sitting. It doesn't even have a motor in it right now. It needs a Barrett in it is what it needs. 2 more minutes. Depends on the engine. LS loves hot cams. Any sort of cam upgrade on an LS, if it's a 4.8, a 5.3, a 6.0, all of those stock cams. Now, some of the cams are better than others. Like an LS3 cam is definitely better than an LM7 cam. If you take a look at the video I have up, I ran all of the stock cams. So an LS3 cam is better than those. The LS9 cam is better than those. All it loses a lot of low-speed power. Same thing with the LS7. It has a really wide LSA, so it loses a lot of power. So those are definitely better and can make decent power. But if you're going to upgrade your LM7 or LR4 with one of those cams, you'd be better off just getting a real cam for it. Any kind of sloppy stage 2 or truck cam or any of those, any sort of reasonable cam is going to be more than 100 horsepower gain at the same boost level on any sort of turbo LS. How many Superflows does Westec have? They have 2 engine dynos and 1 chassis dyno, and then they just got another engine dyno that's a whatever the newest version is. When you use water meth injection, do you have to adjust the air fuel? I think that you should. I just don't know. It's a fairly weird calculation to know how much meth you have and the percentage of that relative to everything else, and the change in stoic value between the meth and the fuel that you're using. So it would be fairly complicated to know exactly what you have to adjust. Usually we just err on the rich side a little bit. The EFR series of turbos are good. Would spraying a dry kit, I'm assuming you're talking about nitrous, be more responsive to the intake or the turbo? It would be way more responsive at the intake manifold, because you're having to, the nitrous doesn't get there until after it goes to the turbo and then all the tubing and then the intercooler and then the rest of the tubing and then into the intake manifold. If you just spray at the intake manifold with a turbo application, really good things will happen. First turbo case swap Fox body. That'd be good, huh? Your 6-liter GT 3582s or even GT 3076s would work if you're going to stay in the lower power level, which most guys don't. So a GT 3582 on a 6-liter, especially a cammed one, is going to work good. Who does Westech do most of their testing for? They do it for all kinds of different people. Intercooler with a blow through or no, low boost GT4553. I like running intercoolers, and I've done testing where we've shown the benefit of intercoolers with a blow-through application. So it makes more power with the intercooler. The charge temperature is lower with the intercooler. That always works. Like I said, there are a lot of guys running blow-through applications without intercoolers and low boost stuff, very successful. I mean, I ran my Vortec 5-liter Mustang with no intercooler for, I don't know, 80,000 miles. So it does work, and I just like the I just feel better if there's an intercooler. Yeah, Turbo Better and the Mustang would be cool, and it would be different. Matt, you had a 3-cylinder turbo Sprint rev at you. That's right. That's how we do it. That's how we did it back in the day. Turbo K-swap Fox body has been done. I'm sure that everything has been done. Mazda 4.6 PI max power with stock bottom end, comp cams, and ported heads, twin turbos. I don't know. I've never tried to run them for maximum boost. I know that we've made 700 or so with those, but I think we did that with a no, we've done that with turbos, but I think we did it with a Vortec on it. Turbo Bear and the Z. The Z really needs an RB25. Turbo twin plug 2.5-liter Lima in the Fox. 2JZ. Yeah, I saw the Hoonigan thing, the 2JZ and the F-150. Yep, an 8.1 Vortec. That's definitely other guys' stuff. Do you know if Westech has a spare logic circuit for displaying horsepower? I don't know. You have to just call Brule and ask them. Yeah, a 3-cylinder, a turbo 3-cylinder Metro. So they put a turbo on the Metro then, right? And even when that thing was, when it was making all of 110 horsepower and it went 119 in the standing mile, it's still not going to win really any drag races. I know a guy with an RB25 is a YouTube guy. I do too. Z needs a twin turbo LV3. I'm actually supposed to go pick up a Bear. I got notification while I was on vacation that one of them was ready to pick up. Haven't you pulled the beauty cover on the truck yet? No, the truck is all stock. Although I just found out the truck is leaking something, so I'm going to have to do some work to it. I think it's just a hose or something, but I've had to fill the coolant reservoir, so it's obviously leaking somewhere. Yeah, contact the guys at Westech. They may have some spare stuff. Yeah, that's really hard on a Rottweiler going through with no AC. The dogs don't like that. Yeah, they have complete dynos available, but no parts, right? That's not good. Okay, guys, I have to get going. I got stuff to do. hopefully all of you guys have taken a look at the video that I just posted. I posted a video right before I got on. It's on boost pressure and back pressure and how we make more power with more boost. Obviously, that's fairly straightforward and simple. More boost and less back pressure, or less boost and more back pressure. And guess what? They both made more power, but how is that even possible? There's no way you could go down in boost and up in back pressure and still make more power, right? But you can, and that's why I did the video on it. Thanks for showing up, guys. I will see you all mañana.